Okay, so today we're going to be looking at rounding, or to give it so, the correct term is approximation. I chose rounding because it's shorter to write. So if you imagine an attendance at a sporting event, let's say that there were 32,487 people at a sporting event. We could take this number and we could write this to a variety of answers. All you need to remember for this is the column headings: units, tens, hundreds, thousands and tens of thousands. So if we wanted to write to the nearest 10, what we do is we take our number 32487 and we go one beyond the column that we're looking at. So this is the tens column, so we actually look at the units and we use what is known as the 5 or more rule. And what we say is that if this digit is 5 or more, it increases this digit by 1 and then this goes to 0. So to the nearest 10, this becomes 324. Now the 7 is bigger than 5, which means it's going to increase the 8 by 1 to turn it into a 9, and then the 7 goes to a 0. So to the nearest 10, it's 32,490. Okay, if we wanted to write it to the nearest 100, again, write down my original number, which is 32487. This is the hundreds column, so it's the tens column which is going to determine what happens to this 4. So I just put a little line underneath that. Anything after this 8 just automatically goes to 0. Because this 8 is bigger than 5, it means it's going to increase the 4 by 1. So that means this now becomes 325, because this was more than 5, so it increases this by 1. So that's why I changed into a 5. And everything else goes to 0. So you can see when I'm writing to the nearest 10, my end digit is a multiple of 10. When I'm writing to the nearest 100, my end digits are a multiple of hundreds. I can now extend this into the nearest 1,000. Okay, again, what I do is take my number, units, tens, hundreds, thousands. So that means I need to look at the hundreds column this time. Now, because this is smaller than 5, it's not going to have an impact on the 2. So it's 32 and everything else goes to 0. So to the nearest 1,000, that is now 32,000. Because this is 32,000, that means I've got 3 tens, so I can approximate this again. So I can now write this to the nearest 10,000. Again, write down my number in full. And since we're dealing with 10,000s, this is the 10,000s column, so I'm looking at the 2 there in the thousands column. That is less than 5, so it's not going to have an impact. So that stays as a 3 and everything else goes to 0. Now, it's quite interesting to notice the accuracy of your answers as you go further away. When you look at the nearest 10, compare it to the nearest 100, compare it to the nearest 1,000, compare it to the nearest 10,000. Yeah, we're pretty close here, we're only 3 away. Then we're only 13 away. But then we're 487 away. Then we're 2,487 away. So it's just quite interesting to notice something like that. Now, one final example, and that is when we have something like this. So we have something like 5,998, and we want to write this to the nearest 100. Okay, so here we have a knock-on effect. So here's my hundreds number here, which means I need to look at my tens number. Okay, now what happens here is that because this is bigger than 5, it's going to increase this one. This is a bit like column addition. We can't write 10 instead of here, so what happens is that we carry the 1 across into there and that becomes a 0. So actually it turns into that because this 9 here cannot expand into a 10. We have to split the 1 and the 0 up. I sort of call this the domino effect. So if we look at another example, not very original, but again, if we wanted to look at it at the nearest 100, then I look at the tens, that's going to impact that. That can't expand into a 10. So it means we have a knock-on effect where a 1 gets moved over there, so then that becomes that. Just watch out for that, that will crop up quite a few times. Okay, but that's how we write to the nearest 10, 100 or 1,000.